Hello and welcome back, grade 2 students. Today we're going to continue with Unit 5, Changes to Earth's Surface. Lesson 1, What Changes on Earth Happen Slowly, Part 3. I hope you guys are ready. For today we're going to cover the following points. Lesson 1, What Changes on Earth Happen Slowly. Explore, Explain, Weathering by Plants, page 230-231. So let's refresh our memory. What is weathering? Weathering is a process that breaks rocks into smaller pieces. Again, weathering is a process that breaks rocks into smaller pieces, right? And we said that weathering could happen by what? Either by wind, weathering by water and ice, and weathering by plants. Now let's remember together weathering by wind. We said that each day, every day, the wind smashes the rocks, hits the rocks, and each day, every day, the same thing happens. So year after year, the rocks becomes weaker, right? The rocks become weaker, and what happens when the rocks become weaker? It starts to break into smaller pieces. Excellent. And this is a pattern because day after day, the wind keeps on hitting the rocks day after day, and year after year, the rocks become weaker, and after many years it starts to break up into smaller pieces, changing the shape of the rocks. Now what about weathering by water and ice? How does water and ice break the rocks into smaller pieces? How do they do so? We said that each year, every year, when it rains, most of the rocks have what? Cracks. The water fills in the cracks. Then during the winter season, when it is too cold outside and the temperature drops to 0 degrees Celsius and below, what happens? The water in the cracks will freeze and change into ice. When it changes into ice, we said that the ice needs more space than the water, so it starts pushing all over, pushing to get what? The space it needs, making the cracks even bigger. And then during the springtime, when the temperature is warmer again, the ice will melt and change into what? Into excellent water, and the cracks are bigger now. Year after year, the same thing happens, and the cracks become bigger and bigger until they become big enough to break the rock into smaller pieces. Today, we're gonna learn how the plants weather the rocks, which means breaks the rocks into smaller pieces. Okay, let's check out and see. We open our books to page 230. Are we ready? Weathering by plants. Look at the pictures to explore how plant roots can cause changes to Earth's surface. Let's observe a minute. How are these roots causing changes to Earth's surface? So in the first picture, we see a small plant with little roots. In the second picture, we see that the roots are growing more and more deep into the soil. Okay, so let's check what's happening. In the first picture, the roots are growing, okay, and some roots grow into the small cracks of the rocks, okay, and as the plant gets bigger, the roots need more space, so they press on the cracks in the rocks, making them even bigger. After many years, what happens? The roots break the rock, the cracks become bigger and bigger, and they become big enough to break the rocks into smaller pieces, making even more soil. Okay, let's read together. Plant roots grow into cracks in rock and press on it. This plant grew through rock. As its roots and trunk grew, the pressure was too much for the rock. The rock split into half. Look at the roots. Nearby are pebbles and soil. Over a long time, these roots have split the rock so many times that it became pebbles and soil. So I'm going to reread it and then I'm going to explain. Plant roots grow into cracks in rock and press on it. This plant grew through rock. As its roots and trunk grew, the pressure was too much for the rock. The rock split in half. Look at the roots. Nearby are pebbles and soil. Over a long time, these roots have split the rock so many times that it became pebbles and soil. So what's happening? I'm gonna start explaining. The plant roots grow into the cracks and rock, okay, and they press on it, they push on it. Now, as the plant grew through the rock as its roots and the trunk grew more and more, the pressure became stronger and stronger, and the rock split into half. It broke into two pieces, okay? So the pressure was too much, and what happened? The rock split into half. And then what happened? In the third picture, we observed that the roots, okay, are becoming bigger and bigger, spreading more, taking more space. And what happened? Nearby the roots, we could observe more pebbles and soil. Over a long period of time, these roots have split the rock many times and changed it into small pebbles and soil. It reminds us this weathering by plants reminds us of what? Excellent. Reminds us of weathering by ice or by water and ice. The same thing. The water fills in the cracks, okay, and then when it is winter, the water, what happens? Excellent. The water will freeze and change into ice. The ice needs more space, so it starts pushing on the cracks, making them bigger to get the space it needs. And then during the spring, when it is warm again, what happens? The ice will melt and change into water, and the cracks are bigger. The same process happens over and over again. Over many years, the cracks will be big enough to break the rocks into smaller pieces. Similarly, the plant roots grow into the cracks in the rock and they press on it. As the plant grows more and more, the roots and the trunk becomes bigger and they press more on the rock, and they press more and more on the rock, breaking the rock or splitting it into half. And what happens later on? The roots that keep on pressing on the rocks year after year, year after year, year after year, they keep on splitting, on breaking the rock into smaller pieces to change it into pebbles and soil over the many years. Okay, let me read it one more time. Plant roots grow into cracks in rock and press on it. This plant grew through rock. As its roots and trunk grew, the pressure was too much for the rock. The rock split in half. Look at the roots. Nearby are pebbles and soil. Over a long time, these roots have split the rock so many times that it became pebbles and soil. Clear? Let's check out. So weathering by plants, what happens? The plant starts growing and grows into the cracks of the rock, okay? What happens? As it grows more and more, the roots press more and more on the cracks of the rock, breaking it into smaller pieces over many years, not directly, over many years, breaking it into smaller pieces and changing it into pebbles and soil. Clear? So, one more time. As the plant grows, first of all, the roots of the plant, they grow into the cracks of the rock. As the plant grows more and more, what happens? The roots grow more and the trunk of the plant grows more. What happens? Pressing more and more on the rocks, pressing and pushing on it and pushing on it until it splits into half, okay? And when it splits into half, it keeps on pressing on it over many more years until it breaks it even more into more of pebbles and soil. Look what happened over here. It breaks it into smaller pieces. So this tree, the roots of this tree, okay, they started growing into small cracks of this rock, and then over many years, as this tree grew bigger and bigger, the roots started pushing more on the cracks, making it even bigger. After many years, what happened? The roots kept, or the trunk of the plant kept growing more and more, making the cracks even bigger and breaking the rocks into two smaller pieces. Clear? Are you ready? Exercise time. We are up into page 231. How do plants cause changes to Earth's surface by weathering? Write 1, 2, and 3 to show the correct order. So how does the plants cause changes to Earth's surface by weathering? Let's check out and see. Which one do you think is number 1? Which of these three? Which one is number 2 and which one is number 3? Excellent. So this one is the third. Okay, let's start the other way around. Which is number 3? Excellent. This one, how do we know? Because the roots are growing really big until what? Until they crash the rocks into small pebbles and soil. This is number 2. Excellent. Why? Because they're growing into the cracks. And this is number 1 where it started growing. So what's happening? In number 1, the roots are growing in the crack of the rock. As it grows more and more, the roots become bigger and the trunk and the plant starts pressing more and more on the rocks, on the cracks and the rocks, splitting it into half, right? And at last what happens? More and more pressure comes onto the rock, and what happens? As the plant grows year after year after year, it exerts more pressure on it, pushes more on it, breaking it even more into smaller pieces and changing it into pebbles and soil. Clear? And this does not happen directly. It needs a lot of time. Year after year, the same thing happens until the plants change the rocks into pebbles and soil. So it is a slow process that causes changes to the surface, and it is a pattern. Excellent. Clear? That's all. Thank you.